Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of the Manufacturing IT podcast. I'm joined today by Robert Lutskus from Lonza Informatics. Robert, thanks for joining me and welcome to the pod.
Thanks. Appreciate you having me. Looking forward to chatting with you a little bit.
Likewise. So for those of you, also for those that don't know you, Rob, please, can you share a little bit of an intro into yourself and your background?
Sure. I've taken an interesting journey to be relevant to MES. I was a microbiologist in the pharma space for a number of years and worked with a piece of software called MODA-EM, which was a niche built software, custom built for my company at the time. And then it ended up going commercial, being acquired by Lonza, and I joined Lonza shortly after in 2010. As we tend to do in software, we continued to look for places we could solve problems with software, and found an area from an MES and electronic logs perspective, and expanded our software portfolio from lab to manufacturing. And so I oversee operations for a division within Lonza called Lonza Informatics. That purview is essentially all of the development, testing, validation, implementation, support, and pre-sale support for the suite of products that we have.
Wow. So you're a busy guy.
That's what the calendar says anyway.
Yeah, no, I hear you that front. I mean, from my perspective, I've definitely heard a lot about Lonza Informatics and MODA and the specifically the ES platform, and that's kind of the MES side that I've heard. So can you give us an overview, Rob, into MODA and the products and platform as such? That'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. So as I mentioned, our MODA-EM platform is really positioned in the QC micro lab space. We continue to expand the functionality there to try to really cover a lot of the areas of the lab and try to solve problems for people. The ES story is interesting because we are part of Lonza, which is much more well known for their CDMO and their cell and gene and some of their testing materials that we sell out to customers than their software portfolio. But we had an opportunity to develop this MES software internally, and as we built it, we decided that we thought this would be something that would be useful in the market. We built something we thought was a little bit different, a little bit unique, not quite in the low code, no code buzzword space, but also not as complex and big as some of the other solutions. And so we've taken that MODA-ES platform and we've started to deploy it commercially. We've deployed it at a number of sites internally to Lonza, and we continue to not only grow the product from a functionality perspective, but also really working closely with our customer base and understanding their needs, so we continue to build something that is different.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting story because, as you know, Rob, my background is in recruitment of MES professionals, and really, I came about Lonza kind of almost by accident, really, in finding out about MODA. But the more I've learned, I kind of get really strong feedback from people working with the platform, people who are validating the platform, and just a kind of really good sense that it's a good solution for a problem.
Yeah, we have some passionate people that work with us and for us. We've been very lucky. I've had a strong team of the same people for a long time. I mean, some of them predate me, and I'm the new guy, and I've hit 12 years this month. So that is really help drive some of the passion around that. There's a couple of us that essentially run the organization. As I mentioned, I take care of operations. My colleague Jeremy Tanner does the commercial, and my colleague Sinead Cowman does all of the marketing, strategy, and business development. So between the three of us, Sinead's been with the organization 17 years, Jeremy 15. So it's great that we have such a long-standing group of people that drive this. And where we're positioned within Lonza, we're not in the traditional Lonza side. We're in a division called Bioscience, which is really, we sell solutions out to the market. We sell media and discovery equipment and endotoxin for testing, and then also the software to kind of support all of that. So it's a little bit different, and we treat Lonza, the manufacturing arm, almost as our customer. We service them. They have internal teams that manage it, just like we would with our external customers. So we work very closely with them, and that puts us in a very unique spot because of the feedback cycle. That it's a lot easier to reach out on Teams when there's a problem and escalate things and work very closely with them. So from that perspective, it's an interesting relationship, and Lonza's tend to have taken a best fit approach to MES. So there you could have 3 or 4 solutions on this podcast that say they work very closely with Lonza, and it'd actually be true. And so looking at the modalities where there's fit, so you have your high-speed automation solution, you have some of your larger scale biologic solutions, then you have what we do in MODA, which is we focus a lot on cell and gene therapy, flexibility, mobility, lightweight solution that is pretty configurable and puts a lot of the configuration back on the SMEs rather than a team of recipe authors.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a unique perspective, isn't it? And I guess, as you say, kind of gives you a close feeling to be close to your customer, essentially Lonza. So the feedback loop is pretty quick.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sometimes a little too quick, but it keeps us sharp.
No, agreed. I understand that. So obviously you've been in the industry a fair amount of time now, Rob. What are you seeing as kind of the changing face of MES from maybe when you kind of got familiar with MES and to kind of where it is now? Then, you know, how are things moving from your vantage point?
Yeah, I think that from my perspective, when I started, MES was this monolithic thing. You needed teams. They were big solutions. They were big projects. There was high cost, high complexity, and it solved a problem. I mean, it was needed, but a lot of times the focus was more on the automation rather than the digitalization of the solution. And with solutions like MODA and some of the other younger players in the market or lesser players in the market, you see that shift towards helping to facilitate Pharma 4.0. And with Pharma 4.0 moving everything to digitalize the data, I think this MES investment is really meant to drive companies to do that. Without a digital component, there is no Pharma 4.0. So when companies are now looking at this, you almost see a mindset change to say, let's get something for our users that is able to help them do their job, make it easier, be more efficient, less error prone, all of those things by using the technology that's now more readily available. Cost of things like storage and infrastructure, even moving things to the cloud is much cheaper than it was 15, 20 years ago when you needed all that physical hardware and physical space to be able to do anything.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that's I see accelerating digitalization, you know, within most industries, and obviously pharma is our case in point. Have you found that some companies and some pharma companies are keen or faster moving to that digitalization, or do you find that companies are a little bit reluctant to kind of put their cloud and infrastructure in the cloud as such? Is there a reluctance maybe?
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to the leadership of the company, and I hate to say the age of the company, but maybe the maturity of the company is a better way to put it. Some of the younger companies may get very experienced people with a long history and come in from larger organizations, and they tend to skew a little bit more towards that traditional infrastructure, particularly for things like MES. It's physical servers on site, physical or mirrored databases in different locations, hard backups, things like that, while others that tend to be a little bit more technology forward are okay with it. And I think as vendors, we look to try and find that happy place, trying to be able to offer a solution that allows a customer to dictate where their comfort level is and really deploy in a manner that fits for them. I think as a vendor, particularly understanding within the construct of Lonza as our customer, understanding that you're not going to be able to dictate all the components of what's there. Even from our MODA-EM solution, we've developed best practices through the years of really what should be done in a paperless environmental monitoring solution. And we still go to customers who go, nope, that's not right. Okay, we will do it your way, even if we think it's wrong. And so I think you're going to see a similar thing with MES, where if the deployment needs to be lightweight and easy and cloud-based, you have to facilitate that. If it needs to be the bigger on-prem hardware and multiple servers and overclocked and all of these things, I think that's something you have to be able to facilitate as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the I guess the growing challenges, isn't it? There's a lot more noise in the space, isn't there? There's a lot more companies, and we're seeing, you know, some of the larger companies picking up and buying smaller MES vendors and entering the space because digitalization, especially in pharma 4.0 is a huge market for that. So I guess there's a much more convoluted message that customers are hearing and manufacturers are hearing.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, particularly with looking at your mergers and acquisitions, because sometimes just because it makes sense on paper doesn't necessarily mean it's easy from a technology perspective. Taking two different independently built MESs and smashing them together to be able to solve the problems of the world. Sometimes it's just simply not that easy. Really understanding where a solution fits. And I think that's one of the things I've learned with the MES space is where consultants are so valuable. They're meant to do what's best for their customer. It's obviously not a great look as a consultant to come in and always be recommending the same solution, because you're then that guy. It's the MODA guy, it's the Werum guy, or Corber guy, it's the Rockwell guy. That doesn't make sense. So as a consultant, you're supposed to take an independent look at what's the best fit. But as a consultant, then you also need to be aware of all of those solutions out there. So it almost becomes a part-time job to just simply keep up with the technology, what's out there, and what it's built for.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point, and it's something I was going to get to later. But I guess whilst we touched on it, Rob, then I'll kind of get your take on it then. So, traditionally, pharma MES folk, they either enter the space coming from the shop floor, working up and kind of understanding manufacturing, and then learn MES. And then you've got the other thread of people coming down from the software side, and they kind of fall into MES. Where do you see the kind of perfect fit for somebody, or journey to somebody to become an MES? Is it from the manufacturing side or the IT side?
We've had a lot more success with people from the manufacturing side. We, looking back at the MODA-ES story, this was built with a couple of guys from the shop floor. And so the software was designed with the end user in mind, where we would put it in front of some of our colleagues and on the floor and say, can you figure out what you're supposed to do here? It should be that easy. And if they couldn't, then we obviously overthought it and had to go back to the drawing board. And that feedback cycle, or that development cycle was arduous at times, because it's like, all right, this is straightforward, this is perfect, and the user would have no idea what's going on. So we've had more success there. But what I've learned as we've built out our team is, from a team perspective, you need that mix, because having all the end users drive exactly what's there, you're likely going to have misses of what should be in quote unquote standard functionality from an MES perspective. So trying to take a more holistic approach and understand that if you're going to build up an individual, having that business knowledge of how to make the drug and what the process looks like from end to end, from when it comes in as API to when it goes out and then back into the patient, what does that look like? I think that is super, super valuable to provide true input to a solution, but you can't do that alone. So having mentors or teammates or other members of an organization that have that traditional hardcore MES experience, I think really from a team perspective gives you that mix where you're going to be successful.
Yeah, no, and I think I would agree with that from our side. I guess the other challenge we face, and this is from an MES recruitment perspective, is that pharma MES folk are in hell of a high demand, but there's not enough to go around. So the challenge we're always faced with is how we can put essentially a square peg in a round hole. And if we're agreeing that the mix is utopia of background, but ideally the manufacturing experience, do you think there's it's a short ramp up time, Rob, in your opinion, for somebody to go from who understands MES but doesn't understand pharma but has the manufacturing background? Is it a shorter ramp up time for them to understand the industry, or do you think that's something that really takes a fair amount of time, years, it may be?
Yeah, so I think there's two layers to that. I think if they had that experience, it's a very quick ramp to understand the high level how to make drug. I mean, I think there's numerous MES solutions that in their big customer demos, they make cookies or bake cakes or something, because it is very equivalent to a traditional recipe. So when you look at having them understand the basics of that, great. That is a very short ramp in my opinion. However, all those corner cases, when it doesn't go right, or if it's some of this advanced therapy manufacturing that is like nothing else, it's one batch, it's small, it's very different. That layer down, or in your traditional manufacturing, all of the corner cases, or how to handle things like interventions, or when it doesn't go right, or that deep knowledge that takes years to build up. And I think that's where if you're in a more manufacturing focused role, you have to really spend time almost on the floor or in the controlled space to watch and understand what's going on. And giving them the ability to do that is something that is easier said than done.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying there, Rob. And I think from my side, I'm really passionate about increasing people joining to the MES space. But, from my side, it's built a great career, and that's just recruiting people in that. So, I see a lot of people developing their career. So I try and, motivate people to kind of join this space. But I guess one of the biggest challenges is getting the millennials, the latest generation, into working on a shop floor, understanding manufacturing, understanding the nuances and developments there. It's one of the hardest parts I get, is actually getting that granular shop floor experience.
Yeah, and I think the younger generation of people that we're bringing into industry now, I think they need to be enticed in a way that maybe wasn't always there. The technology is everywhere. I have two younger kids now, and they're in school, and I don't think they know cursive. I don't think they do anything that's not on a Chromebook. So understanding that you're asking them to take an entirely digital world and take huge steps back to everything being on paper and everything being manual and everything being error prone, it doesn't seem enticing. And I think that as leaders, we have to go in and sell them on the vision. Like, yes, help develop what we need to do. You bring a unique opinion because I'm an old guy, so I don't necessarily think the same way you do. So bring your ideas, be vocal, take ownership of things. And I think that's the thing that as leaders, we really need to make sure that we communicate downward and help them understand that they can have a real impact. And I think that's one of the interesting things larger companies do on occasion is once a year, they bring out a patient and let you know that you're not just filling a vial, you're not just filling out paperwork or taking a sample or running a batch, you're saving someone's life. And so I think that adjustment or that readjustment on a regular basis to help them understand the impact of what they're doing, and then more importantly, where they can improve and help impact positively how an operation works is more of a selling point to that generation.
Yeah, I think dollars for donuts, that definitely is something, is it? The morality of what you're doing, because that younger generation, sustainability, moral causes, actually seeing the end result of your efforts and why you're trying to speed up digitalization or whatever it might be. This is the real reason why. It's not just numbers on the screen. It's not shareholder value. It's, patient safety.
Right. Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And then we have to continue to help them see that. And I think we need to be able to look at it from their lens as well, or you get that disconnect in your workforce.
No, agreed there, Rob. So just want to kind of check back on your thoughts on this, and kind of, I guess, a different way of putting this question. And because I've asked it before, is, normally I ask, what's the kind of number one challenge you see with a pharma company deploying an MES? But let me rephrase it slightly differently. How could a pharma manufacturer actively fail, set up to fail in their MES deployment? What steps could they do to actively fail? So just a flip on the question, Rob. So I didn't want to, it's not a tripwire, but just a flip on the question. So
yeah, I mean, not preparing. I mean, understanding what the project is, and again, depending on the solution, the project's going to be different. There are vendors out there where an 18-month deployment timeline for a single line is entirely realistic. There's others that can claim to do it in 6 weeks, and they're completely different solutions, but that endpoint is completely different as well. I think that understanding the balance of what you're getting in a project, so sitting down and making sure that the people that are in charge of purchasing the solution now have involved people that are in charge of implementing the solution at the site. And a lot of times, it seems a simple concept, but so often it's like, all right, you're going to put the solution in, what is it? So a lot of the kickoffs are generally around, hey, we're going to demo the solution so you at least know what you're doing, and let's do our as is to be workflow and really understand what the scope is. And so setting expectations on both sides. What does the customer expect to do? What do they expect their timeline to be? Let them make their Christmas list of all the things that they want. And then you come back as a vendor, or we'll come back as a vendor and say, all right, this is based in reality under these conditions. If these aren't the conditions, then let's reset somewhere in the middle. And then that way you're able to implement a solution that you're starting to solve problems, starting to realize that ROI, starting to realize the benefits of the solution without necessarily trying to solve every problem in the world in phase one. And it's so failure to plan will be the number one failure point in my opinion.
Yeah, no, okay, I like that. And so then the other kind of that might lead on nicely then, Rob, is kind of from your experience and from what you've done and such, what are the common, issues when you're deploying an MES across multiple sites, and those sites are in different geographies, different, continents and stuff? I know off screen we spoke about your time in, Europe, US, and obviously Singapore, but, what's the biggest challenge when deploying an MES over kind of multiple locations?
Yeah, setting the expectation around what the word harmonization means. Because when you look at what sites want to do, especially if we're doing the same thing, putting air quotes up, doing the same thing, does that mean you're going to switch out all of the equipment? Does that mean there's no differences in manufacturing regulations, all of those components? So understanding that you need local representation, but you need some global oversight, and you draw the line very early from that expectation setting perspective to say, all right, this is what we mean by harmonization. We want some terms that we're going to align on. We're going to build the processes in similar manners using similar terminologies, and that way there's some reusability across multiple different solutions or multiple different modalities. So ensuring that that's all oversight, but also giving the local team the ability to build the solution in a way that's going to solve their problems and get their drug out the door.
Fine. Okay. So that kind of core overview with those core competencies on the actual manufacturing facility, that kind of cohesion across that.
Agreed. Yep. Absolutely.
And I guess obviously as we move further towards the kind of quicker deployments and those monolithic 18-month, 2-year deployments kind of become a thing of the past. But how do manufacturers now future-proof their MES implementation or their digitalization of their pharma operations? So what's the key to future-proofing, Rob?
I think taking the customer-vendor relationship as a partnership. I think as a vendor, you have an accountability to keep them abreast of what's occurring elsewhere, because obviously they're going to be laser focused on their deployment and their solution and their technology. So as you release things like patches or hot fixes, some of that should involve an education of, this is what we're doing in the software, but this is also from a technology landscape, what we're seeing other people doing. You're now 17 OS versions behind, and here's the things that you're not able to do because of that. But that being said, the customer should provide that feedback as well to understand what they're doing. I mean, every organization now seems to have a digital initiative, or the Pharma 4.0 or paperless, or whatever buzz, AR, VR. I mean, everything across the board. And so how they prioritize that from an internal perspective should also be made aware to the vendor. That way, if they're not looking at the radar the same way, they can start preparing for it. So if we have a manufacturing line where everybody's going to be in smart glasses, then the technology should be able to be developed to support that. You shouldn't want to implement that and then their software not be able to be deployed using maximizing that technology. So we try to find, at least from our perspective, who that champion is from a technical perspective, and have regular, whether it be Zoom meetings or in person or coffee or a happy hour or dinner or something like that, just to say, hey, what's new? What's going on? And again, that's a little bit easier with our customer Lonza, because it's really just for some walking around the corner or stopping into the site and having a chat. But from our customer perspective, our external customer perspective as well, getting someone out of the project team and someone who helps set the direction of the organization or the software, coming in and just saying, hey, let's make sure we have a relationship here, and continue that relationship to understand how we can mutually benefit each other long term.
Yeah, and I guess it goes back to the simplest things then, communication, isn't it? Having that honest, open, transparent relationship, and going back to that old-fashioned thing of just talking face to face, or as face to face as you can be with somebody.
Yeah, I mean, and it takes effort. I mean, it takes time. Even setting up 15 minutes to have a chat feels like anymore you got to put in the calendar. Particularly since so many more people are working entirely virtually. That chat just sometimes doesn't happen. You have to make time for it. So putting time aside to focus on that becomes just as much as a part of your responsibility as anything else.
Yeah, I think from my side, it's the natural evolution of leadership, isn't it? When you're managing someone day to day and, you're proverbially sitting next to them, it can be fairly straightforward, but developing your leadership skills, your communication skills, I think it's honed in by working remotely and having a distributed team.
Yeah, and luckily we were working virtually before it was cool, so we always had to actively do that. And I've learned a lot as my team has grown, and as we did have that shift for some of our core technologies going from on-site to off-site to purely virtual, and that effort. And I don't think any good leader looks in the mirror and says they've done everything they can perfectly, but I certainly try to take feedback from my team on things that they need, and that's where I think as leaders it's important to understand that you can be good at a lot of things, but mind reading generally isn't one of them. So Lonza has a lot of great initiatives to develop employees and develop teams and develop leaders to an extent. So again, being a part of Lonza is very good from that perspective, because you're able to utilize those resources, and I'm able to turn around and treat our organization like the small startup software we think we are sometimes, even though we really aren't anymore.
Yeah, no, and I guess testament to that is you mentioned at the start of the conversation your colleagues that have been at the business for years ahead of you, and you've been there 12 years. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it, if that leadership is a culture from the top down.
Yeah, and we've been really lucky, because even the leaders above us have been consistent within Lonza, and a lot of our leadership ability to some of the early development they did, and the trust they gave us, and the latitude they gave us to really kind of define our business, find out where we were good, find out where we weren't, and fix it. So it's always been a nice mix of pressure to perform, pressure to be better, but also that supportive structure that you always want from managers.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that front. So kind of wrapping up the conversation, Rob, I guess I'm going to ask you to kind of dust off the crystal ball, as it were. But what do you see as the kind of future for Pharma 4.0, future of MES? What are you seeing in the kind of the long view, really, for this exciting space?
Yeah, I think I think speed and agility are going to rule the day going forward.
Speed and
obviously,
agility.
yeah, I think there's always going to be focus on new technologies. We've pick a technology and there's someone spending time in it, whether it's AR or VR or Bluetooth or IoT or cloud, or all of those things are going to be relevant in some way, shape, or form. But I think the real thing people look for is changing the perception of an MES project from this high cost, long timeline, giant solution to something that solves a problem quickly and is flexible. Whatever the manufacturing type, being flexible to a solution, and then not having that huge amount of overhead to have dozens of people to not only implement, but also recipe author, then validate, then deploy, then maintain. I think that's going to be where the real shift in the industry occurs to make the entire thing lighter and easier.
Yeah. I think that's a fairly good prediction there. I like that, Rob. But look, we're out of time today. But as I say, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy traveling the world and clocking up the air miles. So thanks a million for joining us, Rob, and appreciate it.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me. This was fun, and looking forward to having a beer in person one day.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks.
All right, cheers.